Hey everyone, welcome back to Vony Movies. Today I will show you a 2015 Ukrainian biographical war film called Battle for Sevastopol. Spoilers ahead, and enjoy the video. The movie begins in 1957 at Moscow Vnukovo Airport wherein Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States, pays Lyudmila Pavlichenko a visit and refuses to attend a program in honor of her arrival in the Soviet. As Roosevelt gives the address of Lyudmila to the driver, she then introduces Lyudmila to her secretary by telling the story. Later the reader begins narrating how Roosevelt met Lyudmila in an International Students' Anti-Fascist Assembly in 1942. Lyudmila is a student who passed the entrance exams for Kiev State University. And eventually the Red Army contacts her to be part of the group, as Roosevelt politely greets the pilots and army of the Soviet Union in the White House. She begins interrogating Nikolai, a party worker, about his achievements in killing the enemies. Afterward she proceeds to Vladimir Putin, who introduces himself as a sniper, as Roosevelt enjoys knowing the pilot students. Lyudmila suddenly introduces herself as Lyuda Pavlichenko, a second lieutenant whose position is a sniper. To Roosevelt's surprise, she asks Lyuda about the number of men she killed yet. Lyuda corrects Roosevelt that those are fascists she killed, not men. Lyuda's military record makes her a vital propaganda tool for the Soviets, who parade her worldwide to collect funds for the fight against fascism. Eventually, Lyuda reveals that she killed 309 fascists during the war, making Roosevelt and the reporters suddenly surround her for countless interviews. And while everyone tries to ask Lyuda about the war, leader suddenly gets a flashback about her experience in 1937. Marcia excitedly ran towards the school board to check the passing students on the examination of Kiev University. Fortunately, Marcia sees Lyuda's name on the paper and happily announces her victory as they cheer. Lyuda unfortunately chooses to go home instead of celebrating. However, Lyuda's friends tell her that they will be waiting for her to come right after the class. Later, Lyuda asks for her mother's permission to borrow her dress. Meanwhile, Lyuda's father Misha suddenly gets home, so Lyuda approaches him to tell the good news, yet her father seems not proud of Lyuda's achievement. Afterward, Lyuda sees Misha almost walking out the door, and so she immediately asks when he will be back. Unfortunately, Misha says not to wait for him for dinner. To Lyuda's dismay, she interrupts her father. She says that they already invited their neighbors to celebrate her admission, but then Misha excuses himself to leave and asks what kind of celebration they need to do that. Lyuda gives importance to it. The following day, Lyuda meets her friends, including her female classmate named Masha. While talking, Lyuda's friends planned to celebrate her admission by going to a shooting range. Fortunately, the rest of them agreed and spent their time shooting in the field. While Lyuda's female friends watched the boys compete, Lyuda suddenly joins them and asks for a bullet from the shooting instructor. At first the boys mock Lyuda about her decision to join, but later on they get shocked after watching Lyuda to shoot the holes ideally. Later, while Lyuda is listening to her professor during their class, a school faculty member suddenly enters the room and calls for Lyuda's presence. In a twist of events, Lyuda's almost perfect shooting results at the range eventually result in the good news. After getting her satchel, Lyuda proceeds to the office to talk with the headmaster. Afterward, Lyuda receives a piece of information about the Red Army that contacts her to enter a sharpshooting program within 6 months. After a while, Lyuda prepares her things in their house for her training and ignores her father's questions about her school program promotion. Later, Lyuda gets busy answering her school tasks while Masha spends her time mesmerizing over the sailormen that she wants to get. While writing, a librarian suddenly interrupts her and commands that they go to the beach, yet Lyuda refuses to follow his order and remains taking notes, so the librarian asks for Sonia's help to convince Lyuda to go to the beach as he needs to close the library early. After a while, Masha meets Kolya and Grisha at the beach. After getting hit by a ball, Kolya tries introducing himself to Lyuda, but Lyuda chooses to ignore him. Afterward, Masha tells Lyuda to take a sight of the men playing volleyball on the beach when suddenly he sees Boris, a Jewish doctor, coming their way. Sonia then leaves her brother Boris and Lyuda alone to talk. Suddenly Boris tells Lyuda that Sonia wants him to propose to her after seeing Lyud is wearing a swimsuit. At first Lyuda accepts Sonya's offer to go to their house for dinner to meet their parents, but when she hears the German attack she decides to leave Boris' house and thinks about joining the battle afterward. Leda attends an opera together with Boris, however after hearing Boris saying that she's not fit for war she suddenly walks out. To Lyud his dismay she rejects Boris and leaves to fight on the Eastern Front following the German invasion. Going back to 1942, Leda suddenly receives a message from Roosevelt that she wants Lyuda to live in the White House during her stay. Afterward the reader continues narrating and says that the journalist called her Lady Death after knowing that she killed 100 men in the war because of her braveness and intelligence. Roosevelt gets her attention and helps her to have a place to stay. Eventually Leda joins the army to fight against the German. Unfortunately Lyuda faces tough training as their comrade Major feels eager to win the war and rescue the other soldiers from getting captured. While training, the comrade Major suddenly chooses Lyuda to partner with a grizzled veteran sniper named Makarov after watching her performance on sniping the target hole. Later in 1941 the battle against the German began. Lyuda follows the captain's order by throwing the grenade first from a short range, then arrows slit the tank with armor-piercing rounds, and third killing the driver. Afterward Lyuda favors the captain to give her a forward flank position to shoot wisely. After a while the attack begins and Lyuda finally makes her move to follow the order despite being outnumbered as she snipes. Makarov suddenly witnesses Lyuda's successful shoot to snipe the driver's eyes. Eventually Lyuda passes out after wiping out the Vorozites troops in the field. Later a soldier announces Lyud is destroying tanks. Major General Petrick and Commander 25 Chapev's division. Because of that Leda receives a semi-automatic SVT rifle given by the general. Afterward the captain teaches Lyuda how to use a rifle. While talking Lyuda asks him if he has a wife when suddenly she hears Masha's voice outside calling her name. Fortunately Lyuda gets reunited with her old classmate Masha, who becomes a nurse and gets engaged with a young pilot named Grisha. Afterward Masha sees Makarov in the tent and asks if that's her boyfriend. Lyuda then tells her that he will be soon. While defending the city of Odessa Leda gets injured after saving her comrade on the battlefield. Unfortunately Leda refuses to follow his order to stay in the position and continue sniping the enemy, the reason why she gets into trouble and gets shot by the German troops. Luckily there's Masha to cure her wounds. Later at night Leda spends his dinner with Masha and Grisha when suddenly the two of them excuses themselves, leaving Lyuda alone. Afterward a man suddenly enters the tent and kisses Lyuda. Lyuda beats him out while Makarov sees them. Lyuda then follows Makarov outside only to know that he can't return her affection. Makarov then explains that he lost his family when the Germans invaded the following day. Lyuda prepares herself for war as the German attacks again in Odessa. Unfortunately Odessa gets injured due to the explosion and passes out. Makarov then quickly drags her to safety to a local hospital where Boris has volunteered as a military doctor. Going back to the present time in 1942, Roosevelt teaches Lyuda to cook borscht for their meal as they stay in the White House. While cooking, Lyuda teaches Roosevelt to pronounce the word borscht correctly when suddenly Roosevelt drops the pan and makes Lyuda panic. Roosevelt then tries to calm her down and asks Lyuda what made her panic. In 1941 at Sevastopol evacuation, Lyuda recovered herself from the explosion in Odessa City, while Boris on the other hand is taking care of her while staying on the ship. A sudden attack from German troops shoots every person in the boat using an aircraft. Boris then immediately finds Lyuda to save her, however it is Masha who finds Lyuda and calms her down. Afterward Boris approaches them and says that it's not safe for her to get back on the front. Meanwhile at the headquarters of Sevastopol, Leda approaches Ivan to sign her papers and proves that she's already healthy. Ivan then agrees and offers to get her some tea. Leda finds out that Makarov has died in battle and the Soviets are retreating to Sevastopol as they walk inside. Afterward Lyuda talks to Boris to help her and fortunately she manages to get Boris to sign her papers to return to the front lines. Once back on the front, the captain pairs Lyuda with a male sniper named Leonid because of her desire to revenge Makarov's death. Leonid suddenly feels the horror after seeing Lyuda wounding enemy soldiers while watching them suffer. It seems like Lyud is enjoying killing people after her numerous shoots at the enemy, so Leonid warns her that they are not fascists interests and should prevent herself from killing the man. Despite a rough start to the relationship, Letta and Leonid eventually develop a close romance as they do their mission to kill the enemies. The following day, Lyuda celebrates their success from surviving in Sevastopol. While celebrating, Lyuda and Leonid get into trouble afterward. Leonid suddenly kisses him after beating the man. Suddenly Leonid and Lyuda confess their love for each other. The following day, Masha, a nurse on the front line, calls Leonid and Lyuda to witness her wedding. Then afterward she reveals the death of her fiancé. Lyuda and Leonid then mourn Grisha's death as they toast with Masha, and because of the development of their relationship, Lyuda tells Leonid privately that she wants a son, but Leonid remains quiet, not answering her favor. Later, while Lyuda and Leonid patrol in a field, Leonid suddenly steps on a mine that triggers a flare. To their surprise, it signals artillery fire onto the pair's position, so Lyuda and Leonid run faster to save themselves, but then they fail to escape the field and unfortunately kill Leonid. Afterward, Lyuda carries Leonid and calls for help. Lyuda again wakes up in a field hospital where Boris tells her that Leona dies in the ambush for the second time. Letta lost another precious man from her life. As Boris tries to calm her down, the commander suddenly enters and orders his men to take Lyuda as they need her for the front. At first, Boris threatens him to complain to the general about what he's doing to Lyuda, but later on he leaves no choice but to follow after hearing that it is an order that Lyuda stands on her feet. So despite getting wounded and exhausted, Lyuda is ordered to kill a top enemy sniper for Soviet propaganda. The following day, Lyuda starts practicing her sniping skills for her duel against the enemy sniper, but before she leaves for the battle, she goes first to the commander to see the photo of the mission she's ordered to kill. As the commander talks, Lyuda suddenly tells him that she's not the best sniper anymore. Lyuda then says that the report from the military doctor says she's not fit for military service any longer, yet the commander continues convincing her and even says that it's also for Leonid. Without hesitation, Letta agrees and accepts the order. Afterward, Lyuda goes to the location where the enemy sniper is hiding. The duel lasts for an entire day. Eventually, Letta gets tired of waiting, so she steps out of cover, exposing herself completely. Unfortunately, Lyuda gets shot by the enemy, however she manages to pinpoint the sniper's location and kill him. Afterward, Lyuda walks toward the enemy and finds the pictures of him and his wife. Later, Lyuda suddenly cries as she remembers Leonid and their almost wedding as she looks at the photo. Meanwhile, Boris goes to the office of the general to report the wounded and traumatized Lyuda that she needs to evacuate the city immediately. At the same time, Sevastopol is being evacuated under siege, making the civilians panic as they attempt to get on the board. Convinced, the general allows Lyuda to evacuate the city. Later at night, Boris and Lyuda get to the board with the civilians. Letta realizes that Boris gave her his papers to leave the city as they successfully step inside the boat. Unfortunately, only Lyuda will escape the Sevastopol, leaving Boris behind to take the next steamer. Afterward, the reader continuously narrates, saying that the defense of Sevastopol lasted over 250 days, yet the enemy is still there. Unfortunately, there is no evacuation organized for troops and citizens. Only the general and officers from the command were safely evacuated by boats. Then suddenly a voiceover reveals that Boris, Masha and countless civilians and soldiers died defending the city from the Germans. Unfortunately, the Germans kill about 80,000 civilians and soldiers after battling against them. Meanwhile, in 1942, Lyuda finally made her speech in Chicago, Illinois. At first, Lyuda attempts to embrace her femininity by wearing a dress for her address in New York, but unfortunately the Soviet propaganda minister refuses to allow her favor as he tells her that she's a Soviet soldier and not a woman. He then forces Lyuda to change back into a Red Army uniform. Then as she begins her address, Lyuda introduces herself by telling them the number of fascists she killed during the war. To everyone's astonishment, Letta makes a vital impression on the predominantly male crowd as she finishes her speech by asking, "Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" Because of that, Letta receives a round of applause from the audience, resulting in her successful speech. The movie ends with Lyuda finishing her studies in the university and luckily receiving a Hero of the Soviet Union award in the highest rank. Then after 15 years, Roosevelt plans on visiting Lyuda while spending her time on a trip to Moscow, USSR. There Roosevelt finishes Luda's story by telling her secretary that Ludo won as a diplomat, a soldier, and a woman. Afterward, Roosevelt attends the opera with Lyuda, and her son, assuming that the boy is Leonid's child. In the end, if you like this video, please press like and subscribe to help the channel, and turn on the notification. Thanks for watching.